Welcome back. Because this is real life, and because I'm writing this code as we go along, I introduced a bug last time. But today, in this video, I'm gonna let you decide, was this a bug or a feature? So this is kind of a joke in coding. Sometimes if someone messes something up, but it actually makes the program do something interesting, they might pretend that they didn't mess up and they might say they made a feature. So I'll leave that to you to decide whether I messed up or not. But at timestamp 551 from the previous video, and I'll put this in the comments too, I mentioned, that I was expecting that there was already some data in the shelf. Because after all, didn't I go along and answer a bunch of problems? Didn't I run this program a few times? Shouldn't it have stored all that data? And it turns out that then when I ran it, and by the way, I did not run this code in between the last video and recording it now. So what you're seeing is the output that you watched me type this, assuming you watched the last video. And so what I'm pointing out, let me zoom in on this so that we can see it live and large. So right here it says 5 problems seen, 5 correct. And this might be surprising, especially if you're me and you were surprised a second ago. I have the explanation now, but because I looked at the code. But what just happened? I thought I went along and did these problems, and there were more than 5. So I want you to pause the video and see if you can explain what just happened. I am about to explain what just happened, but pause it right now and explain it to yourself. Okay, I'm back. I'm assuming that you looked at this, because this is actually kind of interesting because this kind of thing happens. If you didn't, last chance, pause now. So here's what happened. First the shelf gets created. Great, that's all well and good. What the problem that I introduced, which I'm going to go ahead and admit is a bug for now, I introduced a problem which is every single time this code runs, right? So this code, which I'm calling the multiplication app, mult.py, mult.py, every time it runs, it actually starts counting afresh. It starts counting anew. It creates this variable n, and it just decides that that's going to be the key under which problem data is stored. Right here on line 47, right? That's the key under which problem data is stored. Well, what that means is that if they already did some problems, and those problems were stored under certain keys, those are just going to get rewritten. So inadvertently, I have actually introduced you to the next operation, which is called update, which I would say, well, I'm definitely going to make another video about it so that you can see it in another case. Update is not really something we want to do here. We don't want to update what happened on, let's say, problem number 2, because ostensibly, every time we run this code, it's a new user. So I'm going to leave that to you as how you would actually fix this code. You'll see I'm starting to stretch the code beyond what's reasonable for a very small example, but I just want to make sure you understand that's what happened. That's why it should not be a surprise that 5 problems were seen and 5 were correct, because each time this code runs, it just starts over with n starting at 1. It runs this loop again, and it runs it the exact same amount of times because we didn't change this loop boundary condition. We just left it right here with range 5. So it just overwrites whatever data was in the shelf, and that is why we get at the end of the day there were still only 5 problems. So a challenge question for you now: what would you do if you wanted to store data for each user? I'm actually only going to partially answer that because depending on where you are in your programming career, you might have a very sophisticated way that you'd like to do that. You might have some metadata that you want to store. It might be time. We might have just witnessed a case in which it's important to go ahead and put some metadata in here. Which user was doing this? What's up? Should we ask the person at the beginning? And I'm kind of solving the problem for you, but I'm just giving you some hints. Should we go ahead, like up here? Should we ask them for their name? Person. We could do that, right? What's your name? And, if this were a web app, we'd probably ask them for their username. We would probably then go off. I'm going to say a lot of things very fast now. We'd probably then go off and, verify it. Here we're getting to the edges of what can be done in a command line in a terminal application. But, we could get this out of the session, etc. I'm getting out of my depth for one video. I don't want to throw too much at you at once. But basically, we could find out who they are. And if they're the same user as last time, we could start from wherever they were last time, and otherwise we could start them over. So to be very clear, that problem is beyond the scope of what we're doing now, adding metadata, but what is in the scope is just to understand that unless we say otherwise, this program is just overwriting what happened before. So I'm freely admitting to you that that was a bug. Didn't mean to introduce that, but I wanted to explain that before we move further so that you could know what was up with this program. So if you understood everything, you should now be able to turn to a partner and you should explain why is it that when I ran this program, even though I'd run it a few times before, why is it that it still said only 5 problems had been seen and 5 were correct?